Welcome to the Cap Planner podcast, where we dive into the dynamic world of private capital markets. Whether you're new to private market investing or a seasoned professional, this podcast unpacks the latest trends, insights, and opportunities shaping the industry. Featuring expert guests and deep discussions, Cap Planner is your go-to resource for staying informed and inspired. Hi, Jody.
Hi, Morgan.
Welcome back to the Cap Planner podcast.
I know it's nice to be here. I heard it's snowing there.
It is snowing. It has been snowing actually over the weekend. It snowed and then it rained, and now it's snowing again. And St. Louis is just notoriously awful at not prepping the roads. So it's just like everything is wet.
We've had shit weather. When we were in London, it was getting cold. And then when we were in Paris, it was raining and really messy. It does make a difference about how you feel like going out. So yeah, I swam this morning over at the public pool in case you want to hate me. And then I just took a walk outside because it's like 75 degrees.
I've just moved from every piece of workout equipment in every different room of my house to just make me feel like I've been to different places. I did make it to the grocery store during my lunch break, which I really felt like was a feat. And I did hit the dry cleaners on the way too. So I'm considering that a win. Right.
Yeah,
But I did leave. I technically left the house.
Good. All right. So what's going on in the global compensation and private capital markets these days?
I mean, I'm just hearing so much about companies laying off and really public companies following the private company route, which is that. And I listened to the Wall Street Journal podcast this morning, and they were really talking about the wave of AI layoffs. And really that so many public company CEOs are looking at how private companies are running lean and mean with these really high valuations. And they're going to their teams and saying, why can't we do this at a public company? Why do we need all these extra people? And it's not necessarily that the jobs are being replaced by AI, but that
just trim the fat.
Yeah. And it's really, they were talking about how it's kind of a mood-based economy because there's not really any reason why these companies have to be laying people off, but they're kind of almost preparing for the way consumer spending is kind of preemptively preparing.
Well, they see that people are not looking to be spending as much money. I mean, all the Gen Zers, they're saying, are buckling up and be mindful of the economy. Do you realize that you really never had to look for a job?
I know.
It's come up so many times when people ask about your trajectory here, and you talk about how you worked at PitchBook and then you worked for a healthcare and, what was an accelerator in Chicago. And basically, nor can you really be fired, because I've tried a couple of times, but that's not going to work.
Not anymore. I'm an equity part now. Can't fire me.
All right, let's roll into who our guest is today.
Well, I think there is a piece of this because it did come up with our guest today, and Jason Baumgarten is a partner at Spencer Stuart, which is one of the world's leading recruiting firms. And really, I think it's so interesting because when we talked with him on our prep call, he said something that really stuck with me, which is that he didn't wear suits and he didn't sit in offices. And literally, we are prepping for the podcast with him as he was walking through an airport.
Yeah, and as you tried to discipline me and say, Mom, can you be, or Jody, whatever you call me in work mode, but basically you tried to discipline me and say to me, for once, can you be sitting still and sitting at your desk? And so I was sitting in my car, and the minute I saw Jason walking through the airport, I was like, oh, hell yeah, I'm going right on into that grocery store. And Jason gave me permission because you tried to lock me down.
It just shows that my attempt to lock you down really never gets me very far. Doesn't
only
really
way
work.
You can lock me down at all, or at least have just some idea of what's going on, is that you have the Find My Phone or whatever it is. You can track my location.
That is a win for me. I think the biggest piece that he shared, which is, he talks about what makes great CEOs and what they look for, and really what he sees to be the special points for what makes somebody a great leader. But the one piece that I will say about this, and it comes up constantly, and I was at a dinner party over the weekend with a friend who was laid off from a tech company, a private tech company, and she's in Chicago. And she was really talking about the trade-off between a public company and a private company and the difference between the equity and the stock. And she's like, I'm kind of at a point in my career where my rent is stabilized. I live with a partner where if I couldn't afford to pay my rent, I wouldn't have to. So if I could trade off between having less cash and more equity, I'm really leaning towards that trade off, which I think is so interesting because this really comes up a lot as we work with private company executives who are figuring out what their comp philosophy should be for staff level
Well, A, it's
employees.
taking some me, I wouldn't do it. I would take the cash. Then I could invest it. But the likelihood of some with fast liquidity, time will tell, right? But I think it's gotten trickier.
Yeah. Well, anyways, we're going to dive into our conversation with Jason, who's going to break down all things recruiting and hiring and leadership. Thank you for joining us today.
Delighted to be here.
And Jason, are you in Seattle right now? Last time we talked to you, you were rolling through an airport.
I am in Seattle today.
How much of your time are you on the road?
Depends on the year, but typically about half time.
Yeah. So fill us in on your practice. I know you wear many hats, and a CEO is a wide definition of who that could apply for and to. So tell us about what you're doing at Spencer Stuart, which we know is is the premier executive search firm. And you obviously have a really good handle on what's going on. So fill us in.
Absolutely. So I work with clients from pre-revenue hot startups all the way to Fortune 10 companies. And I help them really with three things: finding great CEOs, helping them through succession practices when their CEO is ready to go or needs to go, and then really working with the board to make sure they have the right board directors to steward them through the future, whether it's private equity owned, venture owned, family company, or public market.
What is the difference in the tone of how things go if it is a pre-revenue company versus, let's just talk private markets, because that's sort of the focus of the Caplander podcast. But what's the difference in the nature of how you work with a earlier company and a CEO versus a search versus something that's more established, maybe where private equity has their eye on it?
Yeah, it's always dangerous to have a sort of one size fits all answer. But I would say in general, when it's a very early stage, venture backed, swing for the fences kind of opportunity, the investors are really looking for upside. Their whole concept around a CEO is how do we generate a lot of upside? When you're looking for private equity, LBO, credit, those investors tend to look for stability and downside risk a little bit more. It's more important to them because they're trying to get a 2x, 3x, 4x return, whereas a venture investor might be trying to get a 10x, 15x, 20x return. Um, and so they tend to fall in those regards. I would say also, generally speaking, most early stage ventures, it's more help as needed, support as needed. When you get into LBOs or the broader private equity markets, tends to be a little bit more. We're going to be more directly involved in your leadership team, in your metrics, in your ongoing business operations, because they're trying to help. They're trying to apply their best practices to those companies.
Because those companies are already the later stage companies where you're putting somebody in, those firms are established. They may have been a company that's been established for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, in many cases, they're decades old, and the investment thesis is predicated on some sort of value creation levers, and the management, the investor teams are really trying to make sure those value creation levers are delivered upon. So there's a very tight relationship between the CEO, the CFO, and those investors and independent board members. Whereas for something that's more high growth, there isn't as much of a classic VCP or value creation plan. It's more, we're going to get market fit, and then we're going to pour a lot of gas on the business and try to scale as quickly as possible.
I like that. Pour gas on the business and light it on fire.
We have to remember that, Morgan. I like the concept of yelling fire in the hole and jumping in with a blowtorch. I use that one all the time, or drinking from a fire hose. That's how busy we are. So all the good
Yeah.
analogies.
I have a question for you, Jason. When obviously search is well known, right? I mean, it's not as niche, it's not necessarily a hidden industry. Why do people come to you in particular?
It's a great question. I would say one, it always starts with empathy. I actually really care about the companies I'm helping, and I care about the teams, the employees, the markets. The second is I'm a very creative problem solver. I've worked across all kinds of businesses from the largest, smallest, creative. So I'm very good at problem solving very, very unusual solutions. And then the third is I have a very good reputation for not only delivering, but being very candid with my clients and my candidates. I don't want people, getting into a situation where a year later, both of them are miserable. They did it. That happens from time to time and usually due to nobody's mistakes, just simply because business conditions change. But I lived through the dot-com bubble where a lot of people got talked into things they shouldn't have done. And so my view is you want a candidate who's excited for years to come doing the job, and you want, whether it's investors or owners, or in the case of a large public company, a board of directors, really saying, wow, this is the best thing ever, not the minute they close the deal, but 5 years, 10 years later.
You're not there for a short term. You're there to solve really a long-term problem and make sure that the person you put in that role is not only the right person and the right fit, but somebody who's going to be able to accomplish the goals of the business, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Uh,
And that's where having a strategy background is helpful, because I start with what does the company actually need? There's no such thing as a good or bad leader. It's all about fit.
I would agree with that. We see that in compensation a lot too, where you can we obviously we work in data, right? And that's really Jason or consulting. The core of everything that we do is a compensation survey, which collects the data piece of it, right? And Jody always says, and I love this, and she's an analogy person, but that the data tells you what the speed limit on the road is and how fast or how slow you drive and what color the car is and what the interior looks like and what upgrades you have. It really, that depends on the company and the person. But my question for you is, what has been the biggest problem you've solved, and what has been something that really came out of left field for you where you had to pull together all of the empathy, the years of experience, the collaboration, and find a solution?
I mean, the biggest problems in the work I do is often when an owner or a board sees a problem differently than the market. And everybody always wants something that's in their mind's eye. And I always say, I can't create people, I can just bring them to you. And the reality is, I'm really good at trying to translate what they have in their mind to what the market can provide. But sometimes that disconnect is real, and you have to get very creative about helping somebody understand how the market views that opportunity versus how they might. Um,
Board thinks one thing, but you think maybe they have a different cloud on it or a color on it that isn't really compatible with what's when you take your rose-colored glasses off, what's really going on out there.
yeah, and it may not be that it's good or bad. It could be that they think the big opportunity is a product area that nobody in the market sees, or the market might say, "Hey, we actually think there's a lot of cost opportunity in this company," and the board saying, "No, no, no, it's all about innovation and growth." So, and I would say you have to listen to the market. Whether you're a candidate looking for a CEO role, whether you're a CEO evaluating a role, whether you're an investor trying to decide on, so you have to read the market. And search is an incredible opportunity to have, in some cases, dozens of really, really bright people tear apart your business and go, if I'm going to invest my most scarce resource, which is my time, not
Right.
my money, my time, for 5 to 7 years in this business, what do I believe to be true?
Well, I'm interested to know though, because you're saying contradictory things, which I really appreciate. And one is that you try to be empathetic, but also you're candid. So how does that go? Where you like you can see it, you really just want to say it. It's like what they say in the London Tube, or we even saw this in the airport in Boston and Logan. See it, say it, report it, or whatever. So that's right. In case
Totally. I will say, when the book Radical Candor hit the shelves, many, many people sent it to me and said, this was you. So I think part of it is, if you are empathetic, you don't hold back honest feedback. What you don't do is you don't hold it back, and you also don't sugarcoat it, but you're not necessarily mean or cruel or directive. And the reality is, I'm there to solve the problem. I'm on your side. And so it's again, it's not that an investor or a board member might see it as good and the market sees it as bad. It may just be that they think the answer is to go right and the market sees you ought to go left. So part of the benefit of a search is you get those people spending time looking at your problem, going, or opportunity, looking at the opportunity and saying, I actually see a totally different opportunity here. Here's what I would do with the business. And translating that for a very busy set of executives, whether they're investors or board members, is where the magic happens, because you're able to say this person's going to chart that path for the next 3, 5, 7, 10 years, leading the company.
That's my favorite way to say it is, do you want me to tell you what you want to hear, or do you want me to tell you the truth? It's not that different. Jason, just as a segue, we know you have what, 3 children?
3 kids.
Yeah. So you probably learn a lot from how to talk to them about how to talk to clients. Can't be that different.
Well, I think, everyone who goes through the parenting journey realizes that, when you have a child, you have to be a lot more patient and you have to realize you've only got faults. And so that helps because you can come to client situations, go, listen, you have to listen to me, but I'm going to share what I'm hearing from the market. You don't shoot the messenger. And the other thing is it allows you to present an opportunity much more clearly because people trust you. They trust that you're not just making stuff up, that you're not bringing them something that's not in their best interest. I get emails every day from people I've talked to who said, "I talked to 25 people when I started my job search. You're the only one who told me sort of truthful things. Everyone else just told me what they thought I wanted to hear." And the reality is, I just want them to have great impact on the world as leaders.
Yeah, I have a question for you. We just had on our podcast, it was already released, Julie Wainwright, who was the founder and CEO of The Real Real, and she said after she had a company that didn't succeed, that she was told by a search person that she basically was not hireable. And then we did a webinar yesterday where the guy told us he's a someone in the UK who does search specifically, but really in the UK is his focus. And he said that it's been more challenging to find roles for people who are not employed right now versus people who are already in a position. So we've heard this in different extremes. What's your take on that? I mean, the market's been tough right now.
So I think really talented people, there's always jobs. If you have a track record of doing great work, you'll always be able to find work to do. I go back to that concept of listening to the market. You might have to reset what you think you can do versus what the market thinks you can do. But if you're talented and you've got a track record of being talented and capable and hardworking, you'll find work.
Right.
Um,
Even if it wasn't a success, if it was a failure, but you showed that you had leadership and you were able to do the hard things and work with the board, my guess is, unless it was just a breach of any skill set or just complete lack of leadership, that in this market, that especially in the innovative world, that still is credible.
well, it's different. For founders, often the answer is you got to go found something else, right? You're not going to likely get employed somewhere else. But it's also what did you learn from the failure and how honest are you about what went wrong and your part in it? If you're like, "Hey, everyone else conspired against me and I was awesome," people are not gonna take you that seriously. If you're like, "Hey, I learned a lot, and if I were to do something again, here's what I would do differently," then people appreciate that. I do think going back to your question of what do boards or investors look for, one of the challenges is that most people want unblemished humans. They don't want to deal with people who have a problem that have some known failure. So if they have a choice between somebody who's had no failures and somebody who's had a failure, they'll take the no failures. What those people who have had failures have to do is really market it as an advantageous thing, that it's given them more drive, that it's given them more learning, and they have to get through to that investor or that board member that that's actually a positive. And I would say that's hard to do. It is not easy, but it is possible.
You have to be resilient, you have to be able to persevere, and you have to be able to flip it. And it's a lot of where we've talked to the whole Caplander podcast, executives, founders, board members, investors, anybody across the private capital market. And they really talk about how you have to be able to take a challenge and you can wallow for a little bit, but ultimately you have to figure out how to get back on your feet and go forward and turn it into the hardship into something positive because otherwise you're stuck. Like what you're saying, you won't be hireable because there will be no room to be able to say, yep, I take accountability for what went wrong and here's what I'm going to do differently going forward.
Just watched yesterday this we're going to Buffalo tomorrow because I'm from Buffalo and we're going to the Bills game. And so I'm really getting educated on what the Bills mafia is. And, we're getting ready for our tailgate. And I love sports analogies as it relates to everybody does, right? So what they talk about the Bills mafia and why they're so great is because we lost 4 Super Bowls, but we're still maintaining, our grit and our hustle, and that we're really loyal and dedicated. And what you said, and I love this to tie it together, is we have a lot of empathy. The Bills fans have a lot of empathy. So when stuff goes down, they are very generous, they're charitable, they contribute. So I think that whole ride or die is extremely important.
We've all been doing homework because we will not let Jody win, because as much as she is definitely the co-host of this podcast and my boss, she's also my mother. So we cannot show up with Jody being the only one who has done her homework. And for the tailgating piece of this, and then I promise we'll move on, we were like, well, how do you tailgate? Like, if you don't know anybody who's going to the game. And on this Reddit thread, they go, you park the car, you turn the car off, you open the sunroof, you get out of the sunroof, you climb out of the sunroof, and then you go find other people there and you bring extra beers to trade with people. And that's how you make friends. And they're like, the Bills fans are friendly. They'll like you no matter what. Give them a beer. You'll be good to
I'll be
go.
happy. Yeah.
Right. But my real question for you is that obviously you have a repertoire and probably a Rolodex of extremely successful people at high levels. If you flip it on the other side for individuals who have aspirations or dreams to be that person, and they're getting started and they're coming into a job market that has essentially been flipped on its head with AI removing so many entry level jobs, what would you tell your kids, or what would you tell somebody who's entering the career market for the first time who has these big dreams, but they have really no idea where to get started?
And it seems a little daunting right now.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very difficult question, and I feel for all the people out there that are starting in the job market right now or who are facing it down. I think there's 3 things. One is you always have to be curious and improve your skills. And so if you've got time on your hands, you should be learning. 2, don't just look at the obvious or the things that you thought you were going to do. What else can you do? Can you pick up odd jobs? Can you pick up freelance work? Can you put a portfolio together to show that you are doing work? Because every month you're doing no work is another month that somebody else who's working has an advantage over you. So first bucket is fill up your learning cup. Second is fill up work. Even if you have to volunteer with a nonprofit, hey,
You
I'll
guys
come help you
stay
with your.
engaged, right? Talk to people.
Yeah, because if somebody wants to reference you, who are they going to reference you with? So go volunteer at a nonprofit and try out your new IT skills at the nonprofit. You want to be a social media person? Great. Find a small business in your community and say, I'll work for free for a month. I'll help you out. You then have a portfolio check to do it. Obviously, traditional companies are one part of the job market, but a huge percentage of our employment base are still small businesses, nonprofits, universities, schools, etc., government. So be really broad in your thinking. And then the third thing is you have to create structure. And this is probably one of the hardest things I hear all the time. Boy, I've been at this for months. I just feel defeated. And I always say, well, first of all, start knowing it's going to take a while. Set that expectation that it might take you 6 months, 9 months to really get it fully together, and then work backwards with structured time, book your time out. Don't just hope that something comes along, because again, if 6 months later somebody goes, "What have you learned? What have you worked on? What have you done with your time?" You need a good answer. And so that's my advice. At the end of the day, I go back to the market will tell you. And if you're not getting reads, shift your market, shift something about
You
that
gotta
dynamic.
pivot. You have to be resourceful. Along the lines of structure, this is sort of an old school question, but what are the have tos for anyone who's listening who may be early in their career, mid career, and I was just reading an article, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal, where they're talking about it's even harder if you're overqualified, right, to get jobs today. So, what are the have tos in terms of formality and protocol, thank you notes, handwritten versus emails, what you wear when they say business casual? You're on a Zoom. I mean, no one ever talks about this stuff, but it's got to really matter. I know we think about it when we do anything, really.
So there's not a one size fits all answer, and I'm not an expert in the this part of the job market, but I would say it's one of those things where going back to basics really matters, and think about how you would want to show up as an employee. If you think about how those employees at that company show up, what do they wear? Right? Look just slightly better than the average employee on the average day. You don't want to overdress and you don't want to underdress. How do you show up to thank people? How would you want to be thanked if you were a customer of that company? Never hear from them again, or hey, we sent you a nice follow up. If in doubt, you only lose out because listen, what you have when you're looking for a job is you have time. And so the number one thing you should be doing is using that time to try and get a job again,
You may
whether it's
not have time. You may be looking and you have a job. So you really gotta it's even more important that you focus on what has to be done.
yeah, if you're looking while working, it's a different story. But again, I always put it back into if that company is known for customer service, how do they expect you to show up? Yeah, you should thank them. You should send a note shortly after the meeting. You should, if you can, send a physical note, although now that people are more virtual, if
Right.
they're not going to get it, don't send it. If they're sitting in an office, send it to the office. But a lot of this is common sense if you think about the business you're trying to be a part of. You're trying to show that boss that you fundamentally fit into that business. And if they're all wearing t-shirts and jeans and you show up in a three-piece suit, you're going to show them that you don't fit in. You're not actually impressing them. If they're all wearing jeans and t-shirts, maybe wear a polo, right?
I
Just
also
one
think
step
that it's
above.
really important when you write a thank you note or any kind of follow-up, whether it's an email, that you show, and it's even more crucial today, that critical thinking, that table stakes, what you can do for them. It's not about you, this would be a great fit for me. I would be a great added value for you.
Yeah, I always tell people there's a very simple framework to remember. It's you, me, we,
Yeah.
right? You, because people want to hear about themselves first. So what's up with you guys? Second step is me, right? Let me tell you a little bit about me. We're going to work the story together. And then the we is we're going to go off and do something amazing together, right? That chapter, it works for dating, it works for career advice, anything where you're trying to form a relationship with somebody that matters and that is long term. It really helps to think with that you, me, we approach.
I like that. I think you just gave us a little bit of an insight into how you negotiate with your kids. Look, here's what you're going to do. Here's what I'm going to do. Here's what we're going to do together. Well, I think, we really, it's such a testament. I have not a perfect sense of how to be a client of yours, but even in the process of how you became a guest on this podcast, I think is a great insight into how you work because we spoke to you from an airport. You not only did you send one of the follow up emails that you said you were going to do, but then you also sent the second one with the dates confirmed. I mean, followed everything through, which is a no question as to how or why you have been so successful. And I think one of the last questions we would have before we wind up is what your outlook is, especially as 2025 comes to an end, what you are looking forward to for 2026 or what's on your roster, if there's anything you can share or what you're seeing with the market.
Yeah, well, you guys have amazing data, and so it's always a little dangerous to make market predictions with a firm that's got such good insight into particularly hard to find private data. But I'll share a few things. I think that one, we are seeing deal activity come back in the traditional private markets, and there is continued interest in the early stage, not only technology community, but in the biotech community. There's a lot of activity. There's a lot of capital still sitting by the sidelines, and so that's continued. The headwinds are really what we see from a macro perspective. There's just a lot of angst in the economy, both in terms of global trade and even with interest rates coming down, it's still affecting the economy. And you are seeing just some anxiousness going into this holiday. So I think that's the big bubble. Not the sorry, shouldn't say that word. The big economic question is really is the real economy going to start slowing down the speculative economy, which is a lot of the early stage work that we all work in, is the companies that are trying to bet for the future. And when those get too far out of whack, there can be some correction. But you always expect a much higher degree of speculation from earlier stage companies because they're trying to chase where the market's going to be in 5 to 10 years. So I think the big thing we're spending a lot of time looking at is just where the market's going to be over the next quarter. And I'm hopeful, but also watching closely what happens with, you know, travel, what happens with holiday shopping. These are the macroeconomic conditions we all look for. The good news is that businesses are still doing well.
Yeah, that's the really, I would say that's the joke's on you. All of this and whatever your political beliefs are on all sides, but turns out we're actually doing nicely in many respects in terms of the business economy. Do you see geographic locations? I know Morgan said we're going to wind up, but I have one last question because you're talking about, the prediction for the end of 2025 and then into 2026. And I'm sure it's Spencer Stuart and with your own client base, you're looking at this. But do you find this to be regional or are you looking just across really domestically in the United States?
So there are regional differences outside the U.S. I think that we've certainly seen the European economy be a little bit more challenging from a market perspective. Asia continues to be a growth market in many regards, um, and the U.S. market is been more stable, but it also has been absorbing a lot of hits. And we hear from CEOs regularly that they are feeling like they're in a very uncertain environment right now, and they're trying to kind of keep stability, keep moving forward, but in a very uncertain climate. Really, from a fairly unprecedented run of positivity since the '08 financial crisis. So we've had this really long run of growth and stability, and I think now CEOs are seeing, boy, this is a tough time to be running a company.
Okay, one last question. I promise this is it. How do you feel about the H-1 visa issue or the discussion around it? Because it isn't a done deal yet, but do you feel like that's going to alter some of the searches that you do and how this is being structured? Or how big of a part of that was included, having people come in and having to get those visas, work visas?
So it's very rare at the level we work that we're dealing with visa issues. But I would say that, we're big believers in having the most incredible talent and that having the most incredible talent wins. And I think we all just need to think about how do we continue to attract the best and brightest anywhere in the world to want to work for our companies and our organizations. I think that's a pretty important business driver for any CEO. Um, Irrespective of the politics, I think it's, every CEO would say we win or die on talent. So we want great talent to be able to work for companies that are growing the economy.
Okay, now I have one more, and then I really promise that we're done. But
It's okay.
for when you're looking to hire a CEO and you're looking to place somebody into a position, how much does region come into the compensation discussions with them? Do you pay more if somebody's in New York or San Francisco, or does region not make a difference there either?
It really doesn't make a difference. I mean, you
I
guys, I'm
love that.
sure
That's what we always say.
will.
Jody,
I
that's what we
I would
needed.
say the only place
Real.
it comes into factor is at a very small company where they're actually trying to think about cost of living for their executive team. But for most executives, they're well beyond a COLA adjustment or regional cost of living adjustment. Now, we do see the transaction costs sometimes being higher. Like somebody needs to reload, you might have to put more reload dollars up front if they're moving to Manhattan than if they're moving to
Right.
Orlando. But the reality is that's a one-time cost. The ongoing cost of an executive has very little difference because you're benchmarking against your peer group, which is not sitting in your geography. Unless you're, I mean, the question I'd ask those companies is, are you trying to only sell to people in your market? If you're trying to be a national or global company, your customer base is national or global, and your talent base is national and global. So you want the best customers and you want the best talent. So you got to pay national rates, not local rates.
Jason, thank you so much. We look forward to continue working together and thank you for joining us.
Thanks so
Thanks,
much.